Turning 70 was a significant milestone in my life. It felt like a moment where everything I had been holding on to, both physically and emotionally, became clearer. For years, I had shared everything with my family, my joys, my sorrows, my failures, and my successes. But after I crossed that threshold into my 70s, something shifted. I began to hold back certain things from them. In fact, I stopped telling them 4 key secrets that, up until then, I had felt comfortable sharing. The decision was not made lightly, and it came after much reflection. The reasons are simple, yet profound, and I want to share them with you. When you reach a certain age, like 70, you begin to see the world through a different lens. You realize that some things are just not worth stressing about anymore. One of the reasons I stopped telling my family these 4 secrets was because I noticed a pattern. Over the years, whenever I shared certain details of my life, my family members would react in ways that felt more out of concern than understanding. It wasn't always about the facts, but more about how those facts were perceived. I didn't want to constantly be seen through the lens of someone in need of help. It's not that I didn't appreciate their concern, but as I grew older, I felt the need to retain my independence. I didn't want to feel like a burden. Now let me be clear, I'm not one of those people who hides everything just to protect others. I believe in honesty and transparency, especially in families. But after turning 70, I realized that some things don't need to be discussed all the time, particularly when they don't serve any positive purpose. In fact, studies have shown that the way we communicate with our family can significantly affect our mental and emotional well-being. According to research from the National Institute on Aging, people who maintain a sense of independence and personal privacy tend to have better mental health as they age. This resonated with me deeply. Take, for example, the first secret I stopped sharing. For many years, I was very open about my health struggles. Like many people as they age, I've had my fair share of health issues, such as high blood pressure, arthritis, and a few other ailments that seem to come with age. These conditions weren't anything shocking or out of the ordinary, but they were significant enough to require regular attention and care, and perhaps even sometimes at stage of age. Sometimes to the point of becoming a blood failure. My family, particularly my children, were always very concerned. They wanted to know everything, from what the doctor said during my visits, to whether I was taking my medication properly and if I was feeling okay. At first, I appreciated their concern. I understood that they wanted to be involved and keep track of my health. But over time, I began to notice a shift in the dynamic. Every time I mentioned a health update, no matter how minor it was, my children would become visibly anxious. They would check in on me more frequently, sometimes daily, asking about the smallest details. They would question if I was taking my medications correctly, if I had followed the doctor's advice, or if I was doing enough to manage my conditions. Initially, I didn't mind answering these questions, thinking that it was a sign of love and care. But after a while, I started to feel burdened. I realized that my health, instead of being a simple matter of self-care, had become a source of constant worry for them. Their concern wasn't just about my well-being. It had started to spill over into their own lives. My children, who had always been strong and independent, began to show signs of anxiety every time my health came up in conversation. Their worry was tangible, and I could see how it affected them more than it helped me. As much as they loved me, I didn't want to be the cause of their anxiety. I was doing just fine, even if I had some health conditions that needed attention. I was managing things in my own way, and I didn't want to make them feel as though they had to carry that burden on their shoulders. I floated a few ideas about life in the department, then attempted to shake Charles by the hand. This realization was a turning point for me. I came to understand that constantly discussing my health issues was unnecessary and wasn't doing anyone any favors. It wasn't improving my well-being, nor was it giving my family the peace of mind they needed. In fact, it was adding stress to our relationships. According to a study by the American Psychological Association, over-involvement by family members in an elderly person's health can lead to increased stress, not only for the elderly person but for their loved ones as well. The more my family focused on my health, the more stressed they became. The constant checking in and worrying wasn't helping me, and it wasn't helping them either. So I made the decision to stop sharing the day-to-day health updates. I decided that it was okay to keep some aspects of my health private. I still kept up with my doctor's appointments, my medication schedule, and everything I needed to do to stay healthy, but I kept it to myself. I didn't feel the need to discuss every little detail with my family anymore. It was a small act of independence, but it made a huge difference. And you know what? It felt good to have that piece of my life to myself. I could focus on managing my health without the pressure of constantly reassuring my family. It allowed me to maintain a sense of privacy and autonomy that was important to me, especially as I got older. It was a relief to not feel like I was constantly under the microscope. The second secret I stopped sharing was related to finances. Throughout my life, I had always been very open with my family about my financial situation. They knew how much I earned, how much I saved, and how I managed my money. I had always believed in transparency when it came to financial matters. In my earlier years, I thought it was important for my children and close family members to understand the choices I made regarding my income, savings, and investments. This was especially true during the time when I was working hard to provide for my family and planning for my future. I wanted them to feel secure and to trust that I was making sound decisions with my finances. However, as I approached 70, I began to realize that this level of openness wasn't necessary anymore. The world had changed, my needs had evolved, and I had worked hard for decades to build my financial security. It dawned on me that I no longer wanted to explain or justify my financial decisions, particularly to those who, while well-meaning, were not necessarily in the same financial position or stage of life as I was. I had earned my financial independence over a long period, and with that independence came a sense of control and pride. But as I grew older, I noticed a shift in how my family responded whenever I discussed my finances. Whether it was a conversation about my retirement savings, my investments, or even the way I chose to spend money, my family often felt the need to offer unsolicited advice. While I understood that they meant well, it often felt like they were questioning my judgment or second-guessing the choices I had made over the years. This wasn't about a lack of trust or love. It was more about the way their concerns sometimes made me feel as if I wasn't capable of managing my own finances anymore. At 70, I no longer felt the need to discuss every move I made in great detail. I had worked tirelessly to achieve my financial security, and I felt it was time to protect that independence, even if it meant keeping certain aspects of my finances to myself. According to data from the National Bureau of Economic Research, as people age, they tend to become more protective of their financial independence. The research indicates that many older adults experience a shift towards safeguarding their financial autonomy. It's not about being secretive or closed off, but rather about maintaining control over one's financial decisions and not having to answer to others. The need to preserve financial independence becomes more pronounced with age, as people become more focused on ensuring that their money is managed in a way that reflects their values, needs, and goals. For me, this meant making fewer financial disclosures and avoiding the kind of conversations that might lead to well-intentioned but ultimately unnecessary advice. I stopped telling my family about every financial move I made, not because I wanted to hide things from them, but because I wanted to keep control over how I managed my money. The advice they offered, while coming from a good place, was often more overwhelming than helpful. It was important for me to remain in charge of my finances and to manage them in the way that felt right for me. I wanted to have the freedom to make decisions based on my own knowledge and experience without feeling like I had to justify every choice. At 70, I had earned that right. I no longer felt the need to share every detail of my financial life with my family. Instead, I focused on the things that truly mattered, making sure I was comfortable with my financial situation, ensuring my future was secure, and enjoying the fruits of my labor without unnecessary interference. Keeping these matters private allowed me to maintain a sense of dignity and peace in my later years. The third secret I stopped sharing was about my personal fears. We all have them, and I had my share too. When I was younger, I was more open with my family about my worries, whether it was about getting older, losing my independence, or concerns about the future in general. I would talk to them, seeking comfort or understanding. It was natural for me to share these anxieties because I wanted to connect with them and felt that they could help me process these emotions. But as I grew older, I started to realize that sharing these fears didn't always bring the relief I had hoped for. In fact, it often made things worse. I noticed that when I expressed my concerns, particularly about aging and the potential loss of independence, the reaction from my family wasn't as comforting as I expected. They would often respond with more worry and concern, which only seemed to heighten my own anxieties. I could see the concern in their eyes, and it dawned on me that the more I shared my fears, the more they worried about me, and the more that anxiety seemed to spread. At some point, I realized that by sharing these worries, I was unintentionally burdening my loved ones with my emotional baggage. I didn't want them to carry the weight of my fears. I wanted them to see me as strong and capable, someone who had lived through challenges and could handle whatever came next. I didn't want them to think that I was consumed by fear, especially when I was determined to face the future with dignity and resilience. In my mind, expressing my fears had shifted from a way to gain support to something that was only serving to increase the stress in my relationships. The more I talked about my worries, the more it felt like I was drawing unnecessary attention to things that I couldn't change or control. Instead of focusing on what I could do to improve my situation or stay positive, I found myself fixating on things that weren't helpful. Research from the Journal of Aging Studies suggests that older adults who manage their fears and emotions privately tend to maintain a higher level of emotional resilience. According to the study, maintaining emotional boundaries and not overburdening loved ones with every fear can help older adults maintain their mental well-being. By not sharing my personal fears, I was able to focus on staying positive and living in the moment. I realized that by keeping my worries to myself, I wasn't suppressing my emotions, but instead protecting both myself and my family from unnecessary stress. I became more focused on the things I could control, like my health and how I spent my time, rather than dwelling on hypothetical fears about the future. This approach allowed me to embrace the present and live with a sense of peace, knowing that worrying excessively about things that were beyond my control only made life harder. In time, I found that I was more at peace when I didn't constantly discuss my worries with my family. Instead of sharing every little fear, I began to focus on the positive aspects of my life, my relationships, my hobbies, and the experiences I was still enjoying. I learned that some things are better kept private, not out of secrecy, but to preserve my own emotional well-being and that of those around me. Lastly, I stopped telling my family about my past mistakes. We all make them, and I had my fair share. For years, I would recount stories of the times I made poor choices, whether it was a bad relationship, a career decision I regretted, or something else that didn't turn out the way I had hoped. I thought that by sharing these stories, I would make myself more relatable, more human. I believed that by showing my vulnerability, I could connect better with my family, and perhaps even offer them a sense of comfort in knowing that everyone makes mistakes. But as I turned 70, I began to realize that my past mistakes didn't define me anymore. They were part of my journey, yes, but they no longer had the power to shape who I was in the present. These experiences were just lessons, valuable ones, but they didn't need to be constantly relived. I didn't need to keep rehashing them over and over again. My family had heard enough of my regrets. And honestly, so had I. Oh yes, Brené. I started to understand that there's a point when sharing too much of your past can actually start to weigh you down rather than lift you up. In fact, continuously focusing on past failures can keep you emotionally stuck in a place of regret, preventing you from fully embracing the present. A study conducted by the University of California, Berkeley, found that older adults who focus more on the present and future, rather than dwelling on past mistakes, tend to experience greater satisfaction and happiness in their lives. The research indicated that letting go of past regrets can increase a sense of well-being. I wanted to move forward, not constantly look back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that constantly telling my family about my mistakes wasn't helpful for any of us. It wasn't going to change what had happened, and it wasn't going to help my family see me for who I was now. Instead of revisiting my past failures, I decided to focus on my present and future. I wanted my family to see the person I had become, not just the person I used to be. I realized that I had evolved over the years, and those mistakes, though significant at the time, had led me to where I was now. I had learned valuable lessons, but I didn't need to keep reminding myself or others of the missteps I had made. By stopping the cycle of revisiting my past mistakes, I could put more energy into making positive decisions in the present and looking forward to what was still to come in my life. Over time, I embraced the idea that I was more than just the sum of my past experiences. My identity wasn't defined by my mistakes, but by my growth, my ability to adapt, and my determination to live fully. I wanted my family to know the person I had become, the one who had faced challenges and learned from them, not the one who was constantly dragging around the weight of old regrets. Letting go of these past mistakes and not talking about them anymore allowed me to live with more peace and contentment. I realized that I had the power to shape my own future, and that was far more important than reliving the past. Now, I know that some people might think that by not sharing these secrets, I'm shutting my family out. That's not the case. I still have deep, meaningful conversations with them. I still share the important things, the good news, the funny moments, the love we share. But there's a difference between being open and being transparent to the point where it starts to affect your own well-being and that of your family. I've realized over the years that just because you can share something doesn't always mean you should. It's not about keeping secrets for the sake of secrecy. It's about knowing when to protect your peace, and by extension, the peace of those around you. As I've gotten older, I've learned that sometimes the best way to protect your relationships is by protecting your own sense of autonomy. There's a delicate balance between staying connected with your family and ensuring that you don't lose yourself in the process. The older I've become, the more I've come to appreciate that autonomy. And whether going for a long walk alone or with a teammate, it's not about being closed off or distant, but rather about recognizing that certain aspects of your life are personal and not always meant for the broader world, even if that world is made up of people you love. By keeping some things to myself, I'm able to maintain a sense of control over my own life and emotions, which ironically helps me to be more present and engaged when I do interact with my family. I'm not saying that we should keep everything to ourselves. Communication is vital, and being open about the important things is necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. But I've found that there are some things that are just better left unsaid, or at least kept to a small circle. There's no need to burden everyone with every little detail or worry, especially when it's not going to change anything. For example, My family doesn't need to know every time I feel anxious or uncertain. That doesn't mean I'm not sharing my true self with them. It just means I've learned how to share in a way that fosters positive connections, rather than creating unnecessary stress or concern. Ultimately, this shift in how I share has allowed me to preserve the quality of my relationships. I can still be close to my family, but I'm also able to maintain a healthy distance from certain parts of my life. By doing so, I've found that I'm more content, more at peace, and better able to engage with them in a way that benefits both me and them. The goal isn't to shut anyone out. It's to know when to protect yourself in order to show up as the best version of yourself for those you love. In the end, stopping these 4 things didn't change my relationship with my family. If anything, it made it stronger. I found a new sense of peace and independence, and I think they did too. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give to our loved ones is the freedom to not worry about us. We all have our own lives to live, and we can still share the important moments while respecting each other's need for privacy. At 70, I've learned that it's okay to let go of some things, especially when it means preserving my own well-being and the harmony within my family.